Be reading from the April 23rd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: the Trump administration is nearing a loan for warrants agreement to rescue Spirit Airlines in what would be a rare intervention to prop up a single carrier. Tesla reported better revenue and earnings for the first quarter when compared with last year's period and surprised Wall Street with positive free cash. Major U.S. stock indexes rose with the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow Industrials advancing 1%, 1.6%, and 0.7% respectively. Wall Street's watchdogs are intensifying their inquiries into how much risk has built up in the $3 trillion private credit industry, just as some backers head for the exits. Boeing's first quarter sales rose 14% from a year earlier to $22.2 billion, helped by its recovering passenger jet business and growth in its defense and space segment. Anthropic is investigating potential unauthorized access to its new Mythos artificial intelligence model, complicating efforts to keep a tight lid on the tool. The NFL met with senior FCC officials to justify the league's media rights strategy as regulators scrutinize the migration of sports to streaming platforms. Alphabet's Google has developed a new processor customized for the type of computing operations involved in querying rather than training AI models. Lululemon chose as its next CEO former Nike executive Heidi O'Neill, who is expected to start in September. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. The conflict with Iran entered a damaging new phase between war and peace that leaves the Strait of Hormuz closed and the prospect of escalation looming. The U.S. is exploring ways to reset ties with Eritrea, whose long Red Sea coastline makes it a strategic asset in the maneuvering to assert maritime traffic rights. The Trump administration suspended U.S. dollar shipments to Iraq and froze security cooperation programs with its military, adding to pressure on Baghdad to dismantle Iran-backed militias. John Phelan was fired as Navy Secretary after months of simmering tension with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Deputy Defense Chief Steve Feinberg. Ukraine is poised to receive an EU lifeline of more than $100 billion after Hungary dropped its veto on financing vital for Kyiv's defense. Hawaii and Alaska braced for higher power prices as they are heavily reliant on petroleum and vulnerable to the oil shock coming out of the Middle East. Kashi said it fined and suspended 3 congressional candidates for betting on their own races in what the predictions marketplace called political insider trading. The IRS won another battle in its fight against tax-motivated business transactions as an appeals court backed the government over telecom company Liberty Global. A Colorado prosecutor said an immigration officer was charged with third-degree assault and criminal mischief after an investigation into the treatment of a protester. Police in New York City are making strides against shoplifting, with retail theft down a little over 20% in the city for the first quarter, compared with the same period in 2025. Died David Scott, 80, Georgia congressman. Today's headline: wildfires explode along Georgia-Florida border. And the picture shows a forest with heavy black smoke billowing from a fire. And there are forestry and firefighters in the foreground. And that caption reads, "In flames." The Pineland Road fire, one of multiple blazes, rages Wednesday in southeast Georgia. Dozens of homes have been destroyed and several pets killed. Drought, low humidity, and changeable winds created ideal conditions for the outbreaks. Other articles from the front page follow. U.S. nears loan deal to rescue Spirit Airlines from fiscal hole. Trump and his aides look at potential $500 million lifeline for stake in carrier. By Allison Sider, Brian Schwartz, and Andrew Scuria. The Trump administration is nearing a rescue deal for Spirit Airlines, which is struggling to survive as jet fuel prices continue to rise. Under the agreement being discussed, the U.S. government would loan the discount carrier as much as $500 million, receiving in return warrants to take a potential significant stake in Spirit, people familiar with the matter said. The investment could help keep Spirit afloat as it seeks to emerge from its second recent bankruptcy filing. The Transportation Department and Commerce Department are involved in the discussions, which aren't final, and the terms of any agreement could still change. President Trump met Tuesday night with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy to hash out a deal to keep Spirit Airlines alive, people with knowledge of the talks said. A rescue deal for Spirit, known for its bright yellow planes and cut-rate fares, would expand a series of private sector investments that Trump has overseen in his second term. Those have included government-owned stakes in companies his administration considers strategically important. Last year, the federal government became Intel's largest shareholder, acquiring nearly 10% of the semiconductor manufacturer's shares by converting $8.9 billion of 2022 CHIPS Act grants into equity. It also invested in a semiconductor manufacturing startup founded by a former Intel chief executive. The Commerce Department struck an agreement earlier this year to acquire a stake in a rare earth metals producer, while the Pentagon reached a separate deal last year for a stake in another rare earth mining company. While the government has helped the airline industry in times of crisis, such as during the aftermath of September 11th terrorist attacks and the COVID-19 pandemic, rescuing Spirit would be a rare intervention to prop up a single carrier. Trump, a Republican, said Tuesday he was troubled by the idea that Spirit, which employs about 14,000 people, could go out of business. Maybe the federal government should help that one out, he said on CNBC. Spirit Airlines would be on a much firmer financial footing had the Biden administration not recklessly blocked the airline's merger with JetBlue, White House spokesman Kush Desai said Wednesday. Spirit has sold off planes, streamlined operations, and raised fares. But the surge in jet fuel prices driven by the war in Iran has heaped higher costs on airlines, compounding Spirit's challenge and threatening the agreement Spirit had reached with creditors. Shares of other airlines fell after the Wall Street Journal reported earlier Wednesday that the Trump administration was nearing a Spirit rescue. Frontier, one of Spirit's main competitors for budget fares, fell 11.8%. Bigger airlines also moved lower, with United Airlines down 5.6%, Delta down 2.6%, and American down 2.3%. Iran war shifts into phase of crippling stalemate. As Tehran toughens its stance, closure of strait puts U.S. under increasing pressure. By Georgi Kanchev, Jared Malzin, and Summer said. Islamabad, Pakistan. The conflict with Iran has entered a damaging new phase, a crippling limbo between war and peace that leaves the Strait of Hormuz closed and the prospect of escalation looming. The missiles and bombs that the U.S. and Israel rained down on Iran and Tehran's retaliatory salvos might have stopped with President Trump's indefinite extension of a ceasefire. But the battle for the control of the strait, one of the most important conduits of global commerce, is raging, leaving commodity traders on edge and helping push world oil prices above $100 a barrel on Wednesday. Iranian forces attacked 3 cargo ships on Wednesday, people familiar with the fighting said. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy sought to keep Iran from exporting oil or receiving supplies. Arab mediators working to restore talks between the two sides said they feared the situation would deteriorate. Iran's negotiating team has toughened its tone since deciding at the last minute to skip talks this week in Islamabad, the Pakistani capital, vowing not to return to the table until the blockade is lifted, mediators said. Diplomacy is a tool for securing national interest and security, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai said. This ceasefire is inherently unstable, said Ali Vez, the director of the Iran project at International Crisis Group. At sea, neither Washington nor Tehran is de-escalating so much as testing the limits of coercion. As long as the double blockade stays in place, every interdiction, warning shot, or ship seizure becomes a possible trigger for a wider relapse into conflict. Trump said Tuesday that the blockade would remain in place to keep pressure on Iran. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has said it would keep the strait closed to what it calls hostile shipping. Mediators, including Turkey, Pakistan, and Egypt, were scrambling Wednesday to get the diplomatic process back on track. Officials said the U.S. and Iran continued to exchange messages through third parties, but reported little progress. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Private Credit Risks Draw More Inquiries by Dave Michaels, Dylan Tokar, and Gina Heeb. Wall Street watchdogs are ramping up their inquiries into how much risk has built up in the $3 trillion private credit industry, just as investors' angst has sparked some backers to head to the exits. The Securities and Exchange Commission in recent months has opened several enforcement investigations of large private credit managers, according to people familiar with the matter. The Treasury Department has requested information from private fund managers and insurance firms about their business models. Bank regulators, too, have stepped up their focus on the risks posed by the industry, with the Federal Reserve querying banks about their lending and exposure to private credit. Regulators have been watching for risks stemming from the growing private credit market for years, but the recent outreach adds to scrutiny amid a wave of withdrawals, slowing inflows, and dropping stocks, people familiar with the latest action said. The agencies have been acting separately, but discussed the turbulence during a recent meeting of the Financial Stability Oversight Council, they said. GOP fears campaign to redraw districts is backfiring by Aaron Zittner, Alex Leary, and Terrell Wright. Republicans are increasingly worried that a battle President Trump started last summer to redraw congressional district lines has backfired and might hand more seats to Democrats. At best, some Republicans say the effort will produce only a small gain in the number of GOP House seats instead of the firewall the party was hoping to build to stave off the loss of its House majority in the midterm elections. Some in the party said on Wednesday that Trump, a Republican, and his aides had miscalculated by pressing Texas last year to undertake an unusual mid-decade effort to draw new House district lines to the GOP's advantage. That redistricting prompted several Democratic-leaning states to redraw their own maps in response, and some questioned why Trump's political machine didn't spend more resources on Tuesday's election in Virginia, given the narrow outcome. Voters in Virginia on Tuesday passed one of the nation's most aggressive gerrymanders that, should it survive court challenges, would put Democrats in position to win 10 of the state's 11 House seats and leave the party with a slight overall advantage in the nationwide redistricting war, which so far has yielded new House maps in 7 states. A redistricting approved by California voters last November could add up to 5 Democratic seats. The chess match isn't over, and it is impossible at this point to predict exactly how many seats will change hands. From prison gang to cocaine power, Brazil's PCC targets U.S. and European markets, private attacks in the Amazon, by Samantha Pearson. São Paulo. A Brazilian gang founded in the country's violent prisons is fast becoming one of the world's biggest criminal organizations, reshaping cocaine flows from South America to Europe's busiest ports and edging into the U.S. Long under Washington's radar, the First Capital Command, known by its Portuguese initials PCC, started out as a disgruntled band of inmates fighting for soap and toilet paper in the 1990s. It now has some 40,000 members behind bars and on the streets with a vast network of affiliates, making it the largest criminal group in the Americas by some estimates, operating in nearly 30 countries on every continent except Antarctica. The PCC has become a truly transnational group, said Lincoln Gikia, Brazil's top PCC prosecutor, who has tracked its rise for 2 decades. I believe it is now the fastest growing criminal organization in the world. With the scale of Italian organized criminal groups and the efficiency of a multinational corporation, the PCC has helped drive record cocaine seizures in Europe and sparked violent turf wars in the heart of major ports in Belgium and the Netherlands. Prosecutors and police in Brazil are calling on President Trump to label the PCC a foreign terrorist organization, joining more than a dozen other Latin criminal networks. The PCC is organized crime at its most organized, prosecutors said. Tesla's cash flow surprises Wall Street, by Becky Peterson. Tesla reported better revenue and earnings in the first quarter and surprised Wall Street with positive free cash when compared with last year's period. The company reported $22.4 billion in revenue for the first quarter, up 16% from the first quarter of last year. Revenue from its automotive business increased 16% from the year prior, and the company said the recent run-up in gasoline prices has helped sales slightly. Energy business revenue, which comes from selling industrial and residential battery storage, was previously a bright spot for the company, fell 12% in the first quarter. Even so, Tesla's net income grew by 17%. Now for other articles within the paper. U.S. blocks cash, halts security programs for Iraq, by David S. Cloud and Robbie Gramer. Washington. The Trump administration has suspended U.S. dollar shipments to Iraq and frozen security cooperation programs with its military, escalating the pressure on Baghdad to dismantle Iranian-backed militias, said Iraqi and U.S. officials. The Treasury Department recently blocked a cargo plane delivery of nearly $500 million in U.S. banknotes, the proceeds from Iraqi oil sales from Federal Reserve Bank of New York accounts, because of U.S. concerns about the militias, some of the officials said. It was the second scheduled shipment of dollars to the Central Bank of Iraq delayed by the U.S. since the start of the Iran war in late February, said the U.S. and Iraqi officials. It came after militia attacks on U.S. facilities in Iraq and neighboring countries in the show of support for Tehran. Washington has told Baghdad that it also was suspending funding for some counterterrorism and armed forces training programs until the militia attacks stop and Iraqi officials take steps to dismantle the armed groups, said the U.S. and Iraqi officials. The moves highlight the pressure on Baghdad to align more closely with the U.S. and ease its Tehran ties. Ukraine gets EU lifeline. Orban lifts block to $100 billion loan, helping to offset the loss of U.S. support. By Kim Mackerel. Ukraine is poised to receive a European Union lifeline of more than $100 billion after Hungary dropped its veto on financing vital for Kyiv to sustain its fight against Russian invasion. EU ambassadors agreed to a €90 billion 2-year loan on Wednesday, and the formal process for its approval is expected to conclude Thursday. The move came after Ukraine said it had fixed a damaged oil pipeline that was at the center of a months-long standoff with Hungary's departing Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. Orban, in December, agreed in principle to the EU loan, to which Hungary won't contribute. He later reversed course, citing frustration over the pace of repairs on the Druzhba pipeline, which carries Russian oil through Ukraine to Hungary and Slovakia. Orban said he would veto the loan until the pipeline was fixed. Hungarian energy company MOL said Wednesday it had been informed by its Ukrainian counterpart that oil had begun flowing. MOL said the first shipments are expected to arrive in Hungary and Slovakia by Thursday. Hawaii, Alaska face power price shock by Jennifer Hiller. Hawaii's largest utility is warning residential customers to brace for a 20% to 30% jump in their electric bills in the coming months. In Fairbanks, Alaska, the Golden Valley Electric Association is also telling customers to get ready to pay more. The power markets in Hawaii and Alaska are among the first in the U.S. to feel the reverberations of the global energy shock caused by the Iran war. The U.S. grid has been resilient for the most part because domestically produced natural gas, the country's main fuel for generating power, is actually cheaper now than it was at the start of the conflict. Petroleum accounts for only a sliver of power generation nationally, but is of outsized importance in more remote regions. Last year, more than 70% of Hawaii's large-scale power generation and 16% of Alaska's came from petroleum liquids, according to the Energy Information Administration. Oil prices have soared since the war broke out in late February because about 20% of the world's oil and gas is trapped behind the Strait of Hormuz. Despite falling over the past 2 weeks, U.S. crude prices are still up more than 35% since the conflict began. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, turning the tables on Iranian drones. The U.S. is making some counter-drone progress, and Ukraine is helping. The war in Iran has underscored that drones and cheap missiles are changing the economics of warfare and handing leverage even to weak regimes. So it's worth noting some modest progress on U.S. counter-drone capacity. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll recently appeared on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers asked how the service is trying to blunt such novel threats. One of the core problems was our own bureaucracy, Mr. Driscoll said. The Pentagon is concentrating more procurement authority and accountability in one official. Practically what that did is it took us from like a 16-step decision-making process where each of the bodies along those 16 steps could veto it and start it back over. We consolidated it down. And so when the conflict in Iran kicked off, within about 8 days, we were able to go purchase some 13,000 counter-drone systems known as MROPs. Public details on that system are sparse, but it's U.S. technology assisted by artificial intelligence. Yes, 13,000 is a rookie number in drone warfare, but the systems are about $15,000 a piece right now. We think as they scale, they'll get to less than 10. And we're able to take Iran's Shahed drones down. That costs $30,000 to $50,000, which is amazing because that puts us on the right end of the cost curve. For all the justified haranguing of Pentagon weapons buying, the U.S. can still move fast when it wants to. The Trump administration is trying to institute acquisition reforms, and the test is whether it can force change on the bureaucratic culture. Scaling new tech is a core reason to pass President Trump's $1.5 trillion military budget. We need a crash program for a high-low mix in munitions, including offensive fires and interceptors. GOP Senator Roger Wicker said at a recent hearing, the Trump Pentagon is expanding production lines for missiles like Patriot and Tomahawk. But Mr. Wicker said less than 3% of the current munitions acceleration effort is marked for low-cost munitions. Oh, and we are learning a lot from Ukraine, Mr. Driscoll said. American lives in future wars may be spared thanks to lessons that would not have been learned if Ukraine had capitulated to Vladimir Putin. From the opinion pages, Democrats in peril, from Barcelona to Boise. As midterms loom, the party is a mess, notwithstanding the GOP's problems. By Karl Rove. The Republican Party faces problems. The Democratic Party is a mess too. In September 2018, before Democrats flipped 42 House seats, Gallup found that 44% of Americans approved of the Democratic Party, while 52% disapproved. Today, the Real Clear Politics average says 36% approve of the Democratic Party, while 56% disapprove. For Republicans, 39% approve and 54% disapprove, while President Trump's numbers are 41% approve 56% disapprove. Why are Democrats less popular than Republicans and Mr. Trump? The answer was on display Saturday at the Global Progression Mobilization Conference in Barcelona. The confab of leftists from across the world featured speeches by Governor Tim Walz, Democrat from Minnesota, and Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut. American politicians used to feel restrained in criticizing the U.S. president, even if he was from the other party. No longer. Mr. Walz called Mr. Trump feeble-minded and trigger-happy and described the Iran war as fascism. Mr. Murphy called the president the most significant threat to American democracy since the Civil War. Those remarks undoubtedly pleased the socialists and progressives at the conference, but they won't add a vote to the Democratic column. The more the party's messaging follows the Walz-Murphy line, the less attractive its candidates appear. Anyone who thinks Mr. Trump is a Nazi is already voting Democratic or leaving the country. If that were a winning message, the party's approval rating would be more than 36%. Some Democratic leaders understand their party is unpopular, especially in right-leaning areas, so they're trying different tactics. In 4 heavily Republican states, Democrats are running independent candidates for the U.S. Senate. If the independents win, they'll caucus with the Democrats like Senators Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Angus King of Maine have done. In Nebraska, the state Democratic chairman, Jane Kleeb, is working to keep any Democratic candidate off the fall ballot, and some Republicans allege she is trying to stop the state's Legal Marijuana Now party from running a candidate who would split the non-Republican vote. Her aim is to elect independent Dan Osborne, a lefty who came within 7 points of beating Republican Senator Deb Fischer 2 years ago. He'd clearly caucus with Senate Democrats. His chances of winning are probably less than they were in the spring of 2024. Senator Pete Ricketts won't be caught off guard. Efforts by national Democrats to field independents in other states aren't faring well. In Montana, Democratic donors are backing the independent candidacy of former University of Montana President Seth Bodnar, and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer hasn't publicly pushed back. According to reporting by Michael Shear of The Atlantic, that has created a fiasco. Grassroots Democrats are up in arms, determined to run a real Democrat. That could divide the anti-Trump vote. Similarly, Idaho and South Dakota Democrats seem intent on fielding their own candidates, while out-of-state bigwigs support left-leaning independents. Still, while Mr. Schumer and others try mitigating their party's toxicity by running independents in name only, smart Democrats understand their party needs a better message to attract voters. They don't have the complete answer, but 3 possible Democratic 2028 hopefuls have elements of a winning formula. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear has the tone. Democrats must focus on things that matter. Talk like a normal human being, he says. Don't just talk about your policy points. Talk about your why, and the why has to be authentic. Of course, in telling Democrats to be authentic, he should come across as such. That's sometimes a problem for Mr. Bashir. He's too wooden. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, got the language right at last weekend's Michigan Democratic Convention. He brought the crowd to their feet as he shouted, "Will you stand together, unified, strong? Be the hope that people need." He deliberately didn't close with a Walls or Murphy-like denunciation of Mr. Trump. He ended with a call for positive action. And former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel makes a compelling, common-sense case for a new Democratic Party during every appearance and op-ed. He's running more to the center, offering answers to real problems, and criticizing his party for being out of step with middle America. Capturing the right tone matters, but substance does too. These three are outliers within their party. Fielding fake independents is a bad choice. Democrats still have time to get things right for the midterms in 2028, but less than they think. Mr. Rove was senior advisor and deputy chief of staff for President George W. Bush and is author of The Triumph of William McKinley. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Hatred of Israel holds Pakistan back. A country obsessed with the Jewish state is usually a country that is unable to get its own act together. By Sadanan Dune. Pakistan's central role in Iran peace talks has given the nuclear-armed South Asian nation a new prominence. Washington is right to welcome Islamabad's assistance, especially if it helps achieve U.S. objectives, but American officials shouldn't lose sight of a larger goal: de-radicalizing Pakistani foreign policy. Pakistan can't be a long-term U.S. partner unless it reorientates its priorities and becomes more concerned with the well-being of its citizens than with championing pan-Islamist causes. No issue illustrates this ideological preoccupation better than Pakistan's visceral hostility toward Israel. Dislike of the Jewish state is common in the Muslim world, but in Pakistan, it often takes on a deranged quality. In a tweeted this month, since deleted, Khawaja Asif called Israel a curse for humanity and a cancerous state. Pakistanis disagree with each other on many issues, including women's rights, relations with the U.S. and India, and the role of Islam in public life, but an overwhelming majority dislike Israel. A 2023 Gallup Pakistan poll found that only 2% of respondents sympathized with the Jewish state. When it comes to castigating Israel, a left-wing socialite in Karachi and a right-wing Islamist militant in Peshawar can sound identical. The Pakistani media appears to care much more about the plight of Muslims in Gaza than those Pakistan has bombed next door in Afghanistan, or those in allied China's Xinjiang province. Pakistan's hostility toward Israel predates the country itself. Leaders of the Pakistan movement linked their demand for a South Asian Muslim homeland with the Palestinian cause. While India was still under British rule, the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the father of Pakistan, warned that Indian Muslims would treat the British as an enemy of Islam if it failed to alter its present pro-Jewish policy in Palestine. The inconsistency of championing the establishment of a Muslim state through the partition of British India, while opposing the establishment of a much smaller Jewish state through the partition of British Mandate Palestine, doesn't seem to have occurred to Jinnah. At the United Nations, the new nation of Pakistan fought hard to prevent Israel from coming into existence. Nearly 80 years later, Pakistan still doesn't recognize the Jewish state. Every Pakistani passport says it is valid for all countries of the world except Israel. Pakistanis from the start were drawn to pan-Islamism. According to the Pakistani scholar diplomat Hussein Haqqani of the Hudson Institute, Pakistan's founding elites called to partition British India along religious lines, made it necessary for them to adopt Islamist ideas as part of their nation-building effort. The new Islamic nation, whose name means Land of the Pure, immediately attracted an eclectic international cast of characters, including Islamist and Muslim supremacists. The writer and activist Mohammed Assad, an Austrian Jewish convert to Islam, represented Pakistan at the UN. Said Ramadan, a leader of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, made Karachi his second home. Pakistan hosted Amin al-Husseini, the anti-Semitic former Mufti of Jerusalem, who collaborated with the Nazis during World War II and supported his role as the head of the pan-Islamist Pakistan-based World Muslim Congress. Over the decades, Pakistan has extended a welcome mat to violent anti-Israel and anti-American malcontents. In the 1980s, Pakistan welcomed the Palestinian theorist of jihad Abdullah al-Azam. In 2011, the U.S. discovered that Osama bin Laden was hiding less than a mile from Pakistan's leading military academy. Bin Laden's deputy, the Egyptian doctor Ayman al-Zawahiri, also found refuge in Pakistan, as did several planners of the 9/11 attacks. Pakistan has also sought to bolster Israel's Arab neighbors. Pakistani pilots reportedly flew Arab fighter jets in the 1967 Six-Day War and the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto promised to send Pakistani troops to Syria to defend the dictator, Hafez al-Assad. It might seem as though Pakistan has no incentive to change its attitude toward the Jewish state, especially as anti-Israel sentiment grows in the West. New York City, the largest Jewish community outside Israel, is headed by a mayor who has singled out the Jewish state for derision. Demonizing Israel has become popular on the left and fringe right. Polls show that a plurality of Americans now sympathize more with Palestinians than Israelis. Yet there are good reasons for Pakistan to reverse course. Twice this century, Pakistani leaders and opinion makers have flirted with the idea of recognizing Israel. The first was under the military dictator Pervez Musharraf, 1999 to 2008, who addressed a Jewish gathering in New York and spoke of the strategic benefits Pakistan could accrue by normalizing ties with Israel. More recently, in the wake of the 2020 Abraham Accords, which normalized ties between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, among others, a few Pakistani journalists raised the possibility of following suit. Pakistanis often frame talk of normalization as doing Israel, and by extension the U.S., a favor. In reality, Islamabad would be doing itself a favor. An obsession with Israel is often the hallmark of a country that can't get its own act together. Over the years, Pakistan has become the sick man of the Indian subcontinent, dependent on frequent bailouts from the International Monetary Fund, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. With a per capita income of $1,500, according to the World Bank, Pakistan vies with landlocked Nepal for the title of the poorest country in the region. To turn this ship around, Pakistan needs to see the world as it is, not as it would like it to be. It could learn from India, which jettisoned antipathy toward Israel in the early 1990s, at around the same time that it embraced a more market-based economic outlook. Maybe it's unrealistic to expect Pakistan to change anytime soon. But as long as the Islamic Republic remains wedded to extreme anti-Zionist, it will struggle to prosper in the modern world. Letters to the editor. What could restore America's will to work? Regarding Barton Swaim's op-ed, America Loses Its Will to Work. Our family runs a dairy farm in northern Wisconsin. We have a position open at our dairy, which in the past 2 years we have had 4 people attempt to fill. The first did pretty well, but his girlfriend broke up with him, and he decided that quitting his job and sitting in the family hunting cabin in the woods would make him a better suitor. The second thought explicit directions were a mere suggestion and not to be followed. The third thought his cell phone was part of his anatomical makeup. The fourth seems to think work is an inconvenience to his time off. It seems Mr. Swaim is right that we're deporting the only people who want to and understand work. From Eric Hillen, Ladysmith, Wisconsin. Same topic. What a timely article by Mr. Swaim in this semi-quincentennial year of our country's Declaration of Independence. Surely we can point to numerous reasons, but one of the more common denominators of our great heritage for generation upon generation was our appreciation for the value of honest labor. Gradually, politics has eroded this proud virtue at America's core. And while I typically follow the side of optimism, I question whether the nation has the will to bring this honorable trait back front and center. I do know I'm eternally grateful for my parents, their parents, and beyond for instilling that work ethic in us. From Carl Sisenik, Lansdale, Pennsylvania. New topic. An Iran deal kicks the nuke down the road. Talk of a deal that depends on Iranian promises is absurd. Tehran doesn't keep promises. The U.S. should promise Iran relief from punishment only after the regime takes certain verifiable actions. For example, the U.S. could promise to reverse certain sanctions after Iran hands over its enriched uranium and key enrichment capabilities, such as centrifuges. Or the U.S. could promise to gradually release frozen Iranian assets over 10 years, subject to no renewed efforts to acquire nuclear weapons. Or we could promise to relax the blockade on Iranian maritime exports, subject to long-term good behavior, including limiting conventional military capabilities, no Iranian assistance to proxy militias, and significant sharing of oil export revenues to compensate America and its Middle East allies for the damage Iran has done in this war. No matter what, the U.S. and Israel should promote insurrection, either by the Iranian army or citizens armed and assisted by Americans and Israelis. From Rich Beatty, Aliso Viejo, California. Same topic. Better wait on the confetti for now, and maybe forever, if the world isn't willing to give Iran a serious ultimatum. This war isn't about the threat of nuclear proliferation, suppression of protesters, or free traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. It's about the ideology of death to the infidels, held by the Iranians in power since 1979. Lasting peace can never be achieved until this destructive dogma leaves Tehran. Anything short of that is merely kicking the nuke down the road. From Frank Floyd, Chagrin Falls, Ohio. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a boss seated at a desk interviewing a prospective hiree. And that man has a whistle dangling from a rope around his neck. And the boss says, "Your resume looks great. It's the whistle around your neck that concerns me." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 23rd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day or evening, and enjoy a beautiful weekend, hopefully.